Kirk Cousins and the Falcons offense are at their best when they're pushing the ball down the field.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start your season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, if you don't know me, I'm your very, very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the Iron that Sharpens the Iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for nearly 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that is everydayers of this podcast that goes strong with me each and every day. You make this podcast your first listen each and every day, and then become an everydayer. An illustrious everydayer. All you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we are joined by Dalton Wasserman, a PFF analyst. He's going to talk about what stood out with Kirk Cousins and the Falcons win over Tampa. We'll talk some trade deadline possibilities. We'll look ahead to the 2025 NFL draft to see if the Falcons can find some additional support for their pass rush next year as well. So let's jump into that conversation with Dalton Wasserman right now. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, where we are joined by an illustrious guest. He is Dalton Wasserman, the PFF analyst, co-host of the PFF College Football Show, co-host of the PFF NFL Review Show, and he's here to talk with us about the current state of the Atlanta Falcons, as well as, I always got to look ahead when we have Dalton on the podcast to the upcoming NFL draft and whatnot. But let's talk more specifically about the recent comings and goings for the Atlanta Falcons, which is Kirk Cousins had his highest graded game of the season so far this year, just beating out his first game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, seemingly incredible against this Todd Bowles-led defense. But you sort of, from the PFF perspective, sort of what were some of the things that stood out that led to such a highly graded performance?
So in this game, it was a little bit different than the first game, I thought, because Todd Bowles is known for his blitzing. And in the first game, he blitzed Cousins a lot, and Cousins just beat the blitz with his arm, getting rid of the ball to the right spot. And in this one, Bowles decided to back off and play more zone coverage, and Cousins had clean pockets all day to work with. And you already know, if you give Kirk Cousins a consistently clean pocket, he's going to find the right throws, right? He's a veteran. He knows where to go with the football. He's been around a long time. So Todd Bowles has tried 2 different strategies in 2 games, honestly, and neither one of them has worked. Obviously, the involvement of Kyle Pitts was a big deal in this game, other than the razor thin margin between fumbling away a touchdown and not. But no, Cousins he's just been fantastic in both of those games. I think you just see week in and week out, there are moments, or in these 2 cases, entire games, where the veteran presence is so much different than what Atlanta had last year, and that's making the difference. Has Cousins made some mistakes this year? Absolutely, but that veteran presence, whether they're behind, whether it's the defense changing looks on him, he's making the right throws. He's getting, for the most part, the ball to the right places.
So, we've seen what he's done against Todd Bowles' defense. Unfortunately, the Falcons will not get another opportunity to face this Tampa Bay defense, at least in the regular season. We'll see what happens in January. But do we look at this as this is something that we can expect more from Kirk Cousins as the rest of the season unfolds? Or do you feel like some of these upcoming defenses, like the Vikings, like, the Chargers and Broncos or whatnot, will be able to throw different challenges at Kirk Cousins in the coming weeks?
They will. I mean, it's a more advantageous matchup this week against the Dallas defense, who's been struggling. But I think with Cousins, the biggest thing is I found there's a big split between when he has thrived this season and when he has struggled in working the ball vertically down the field, right? When the Falcons are getting open and he's making throws beyond that 10-yard mark that really start to stretch a defense vertically, those are the games that he's been really, really good in. I think about these 2 Tampa Bay games, or I think about even the Saints game, when he made the comeback. When he's made throws vertically down the field, they've had a lot of success on offense, but there's been moments where they've kind of worked in this 10-yard bubble where it's either running the football or it's just a lot of checkdowns and a lot of short passes. It's something you saw in the Seattle game where he really struggled to work the ball vertically down the field. So I think there's a dynamic here where creating more explosive plays and Cousins being more willing to throw the ball into those windows earlier in games that really could make this Falcons offense a serious threat, because I think we're starting to see the run game really get going now. The offensive line looks better the last few weeks. Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, obviously a great pair in the run game. But I think the difference for me when the Falcons win is when they can make vertical throws down the field. You obviously Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney, there's enough weapons to do it with, and Cousins just has to work it down the field. There's just days I still see where sometimes he can get caught up with too much checkdowns and trying to complete passes. When they get explosive, they get really, really fun to watch on offense.
Now, you mentioned Kyle Pitts' big day, obviously National Tight Ends Day, so it was a very timely performance for him. But he earned one of the highest grades he's had in the PFF system since his rookie year, where seemingly, 80-plus grades were at least a much more regular occurrence than they have been the last couple of years. Can we expect the return of the Falcons unicorn, and will we sort of see more continued production from Kyle Pitts like we've seen in recent weeks?
I think you can, and I think there's been an adjustment. One, after that Saints game where he was shut out, there was clearly that next Thursday against Tampa Bay an emphasis on, look, we need to get this guy the football, right? You're seeing a higher target share, 14 targets through his first 4 games. And what is that? 27 through his last 4 games. So you're talking about doubling the target share of a guy who's really, really talented. And I think you've done a good job of moving him around the formation more. He's obviously not a great blocker the way he's built and his play style, right? And they brought in Charlie Warner to do a lot of that work. So moving him around the formation, getting a big guy like that in the slot where he can find some one-on-one matchups, I think has really been somewhere that they've found a rhythm in this offense of using him, honestly, almost a bit more like Drake London, right? I know London's a little bit faster, but they're of similar size. They can do a lot of similar things. I think the increased usage and increased versatility of Kyle Pitts has been a big help to this offense. And Zach Robinson, I think, is starting to really figure out how to use him when he's got other guys who a tight end who can block, and they can figure it out on the offensive line who can block in the run game. Kyle Pitts is a passing weapon, and they're using him as such lately.
Yeah, and you talk about the verticality in the Falcons offense. You've seen that quite a bit with Kyle Pitts over these last couple of weeks, and as long as they continue to implement that, as you said, I think we'll see this Falcons offense continue to be successful. But the defense is still a work in progress, and I want to get Dalton's thoughts on that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But first, guys, I got to let you know about PFF and how they have you covered all season long with the best data, tools, and analysis in the game. Sign up for the PFF Plus today to unlock all of their famous player grades and premium stats. Push to the playoffs in your fantasy league with in-season tools, and I can vouch for this because basically I set it and forget it. They got that lineup optimizer with PFF Plus, and it's basically like, hey, I don't have to think about my fantasy team this week, as well as award-winning rankings from fantasy expert Nathan Yonke, and stay connected to the next generation of talent with the best NFL draft coverage on the planet. No matter what you're looking for, PFF Plus has what you need to make winning decisions all season long. Sign up for PFF Plus today for less than $10 a month. So if you're a renter like me, you often feels like you're in this endless loop where you're just watching your money vanish into thin air. And so it's time to end the loop, turn the rent game around, and start earning some serious rewards. And that's where Built Rewards comes in. Built is breaking ground as the neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent every month. Pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use the points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards flight and hotel stays, or you can redeem them toward a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle, whatever it is. So earn points today by paying your rent right now when you go to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnfl. Make sure you use our URL so that they know we sent you at joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl to start earning points with your rent payments today. So, Dalton, let's talk about this Falcons defense. It's been much maligned recently by the fans in recent weeks. But at least I'm looking at some of the PFF grades, and it feels like it's kind of grading out in y'all's system as more of a average unit. Is there some sort of disconnect there between the fans and sort of what PFF is seeing, or maybe the Falcons defense is doing a little bit better in certain areas that they're not maybe getting enough credit for? How do you sort of view that?
Yeah, I think there's some playmakers, especially in the back seven of this defense. Obviously, we know about Jesse Bates, and you got young guys like Clark Phillips and Nate Landman stepping up. The one consistent thing I've seen that I think is the most frustrating is just the complete lack of a pass rush, right? For us, they have the second lowest pass rush grade in the league, only ahead of Carolina. They've been consistently in the bottom 5 all season in things like pressure percentage and pass rush win rate. They are just not getting to the quarterback. And I have to wonder, I already know they already did it once with Matt Judon in the preseason getting a pass rusher, but I have to wonder if they're a team that's fishing for another pass rusher in this trade market, because that's really the big Achilles heel of this team. I think they can cover well enough to make the playoffs and win this division. I think they can play the run well enough. They were really good in run defense last year. They're pretty good again this year. It's this pass rush. It's the need for somebody up front, because Raheem Morris, he doesn't blitz a whole lot, right? He wants to send 4, maybe 5 stand-up guys, up front, but they're just not getting it done right now. And when you leave really good quarterbacks clean pockets, I think it was most noticeable, especially in the Kansas City game when they lost that game. They just could not get to Patrick Mahomes. So either creating more pressure with the guys that they have, or maybe finding another external option to help this pass rush would go a long way.
Yeah, well, you were on the podcast back in August, basically the day after the Falcons made the Matthew Judon trade, and the expectations were that, okay, that will help solve some of the Falcons pass rush issues. He hasn't quite lived up to the billing up to this point. Do you feel like because of the quote unquote, at least up to this point, failure of that Judon trade, should that make the Falcons even more proactive at the upcoming trade deadline, or maybe a little bit more gun shy? Where do you sort of follow that?
I think it's an assessment on whether they think they can make a run at an NFC title with the current team they have. Because I think, with the Buccaneers injuries and the struggles of the Saints and the Panthers, they probably feel like they could win the division with the team as is. But if they're looking to make a deep playoff run and you're facing all the good quarterbacks in the playoffs, whether it's Matthew Stafford or Brock Purdy or Jared Goff or whoever, right? If you play a team like Detroit and you don't get to Jared Goff at all, they're going to score 40 points. So I think if it's that difference, if they feel like they can make a deep run in the NFC as they are, they probably stand pat. But I can't imagine they think that with a pass rush this unproductive. I would think if they want to get beyond, say maybe one playoff win or getting knocked out in the first round that they play in, that they're going to need somebody who can cause some havoc in the backfield. So I would think that's always the goal, right? Especially when you go and get Kirk Cousins, you're supposedly kind of all in on this thing, even though they drafted Michael Penix in the first round, but they're trying to make a playoff run here. And I think if you do, you need to trade for some sort of, whether inside or outside, some sort of pass rusher that makes an impact. Otherwise, it could become a problem when you face a good quarterback in that first round of the playoffs that they just tear you up because you're not getting to them. It's not like the guys in the back end aren't good enough. They're good players. But if you leave quarterbacks clean pockets, they can hurt you.
Now, I know this is not your area of expertise, but are there any names out there that Falcon fans should at least keep their eyes on over the next couple of days between now and the trade deadline?
The big one that's been floating around is Zadarius Smith from the Browns, and that's been from several teams. It doesn't sound like, any of the huge names like a Myles Garrett or a Max Crosby are going to get traded. Zadarius Smith makes some sense. There have been some rumors, about Jadeveon Clowney from Carolina. Not sure that they would trade in division, but it's really kind of that thing where you're not seeing huge names, but some more supplemental pieces. Smith from the Browns stands out as one that seems very likely to get traded.
Okay. Well, because the Falcons pass rush has not been solved with the Matthew Judon trade, and I asked you this back in August, under the expectation that even if Judon had lived up to the billing, that the Falcons would still need to get younger at that position in the upcoming 2025 NFL draft. And so, Dalton, this gets more into your area of expertise as the co-host of the PFF College Football Show. And I asked you basically back in August about this upcoming draft class, and particularly with the pass rushers. And, now that we're a couple of months later, sort of where does this pass rush class sort of stand to you at this point?
I think there's a lot of really good players. I don't think there's a consensus yet on who the top guy is and who's maybe an edge rusher that could go in the top 5 of the draft. But you talk about a lot of very good players. When you think about James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee is a freakish athlete. I think he's in a very similar mold to a Dallas Turner, who Atlanta looked at in last year's draft. Nick Scorton from Texas A&M is a big, powerful player who plays the run well and is developing as a pass rusher. Abdul Carter is a guy as a fit for the Falcons from Penn State who intrigues me a lot. He was playing linebacker before this season. He is an absolutely explosive athlete. He wears number 11 at Penn State, so of course he gets the Micah Parsons comparisons. This is a guy, when he is on, he is the best player on the field, on any field he steps on. He's an explosive athlete. He can even drop into coverage and make some plays. There are people, you're going to hear Micah Parsons comparisons made as we get into draft season and towards the combine and all that. Freakish athlete, still kind of learning how to play off of the edge as opposed to at linebacker, still developing as a run defender, but he is as freakish a pass rusher as there is. He's a guy that I've thought for a while could be a good fit in the Falcons defense if he were to drop to their draft slot, because he may be a guy that, as Penn State gets into more important games this season and Carter rolls towards the combine, that he's a guy who might shoot up draft boards. I think he'd be a really nice fit in Atlanta.
Yeah, we'll have to sort of see. Obviously, with the Falcons playing good football, obviously, I won't be able to get into the draft as early as I have been in some recent years where the Falcons haven't quite been in it late in the season. So hopefully I will not be able to dive into the Abdul Carter film as well as other pass rushers in this draft class for quite some time. But Dalton, definitely thank you for sort of keeping us up to date on some of these things. Let the people know some of the things that you and Max are getting into on the PFF College Football Show, some of the other things you're working on, and where they can find your stuff.
So as always, our written content from all our great analysts at pff.com and some of it beyond a PFF Plus subscription, which is well worth it. You mentioned all the tools before and the fantasy tools and everything like that on the website. And then Max and I, we've got on Tuesday nights our PFF College Football Show, our preview show, where we break down the biggest upcoming games of the week. And then Sunday mornings, our college review show, where we go back over a lot of those games and any other storylines that pop up every Saturday. And we're going to start updating what we think of this playoff race coming up here soon, because only 5 weeks left in the regular season. It's about to get really, really fun.
Absolutely. Dalton, really appreciate you. Go check it out, guys, over at PFF. Check out PFF Plus today for less than $10 a month. Really, again, thank you, Dalton, for joining us, and hopefully look forward to future conversations when we get to draft season and we can actually break down some of these guys that may or may not be available for the Atlanta Falcons.
Absolutely. Anytime, Aaron. I appreciate it.
So there is still plenty more to come on today's episode. We'll give you guys an update on the Falcons injuries that we got from Raheem Morris Wednesday morning before the practice reports have come out. And we'll talk about sort of the potential possibilities that Ruke Orhorhoro, Troy Andersen, Justin Simmons missed time, and what will the Falcons do to replace those guys. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is going to give you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And on that page, you may find the Falcons favored by 2.5 points against the Dallas Cowboys. So check it out by going to FanDuel.com today to join, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. So head on over to America's #1 sportsbook at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, of course, we have another episode coming your way Wednesday evening on YouTube and Thursday on your preferred podcast platform. That is, of course, a crossover Thursday, which, of course, the Wednesday on YouTube confuses some folks. But, if you've been a long time listener of the Falcons YouTube channel, you know that, or listener, viewer, you know that you get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. But let's talk about the Falcons' current injury situation. Raheem Morris spoke to the media ahead of Wednesday's practice and gave some minor updates, nothing comprehensive when it came to the injuries for a couple of players on the defensive side of the ball that we were concerned about going into this game, including two guys in Troy Andersen, the linebacker, and safety Justin Simmons that missed last week's game, and a player in Ruke Orhorhoro, the defensive lineman, that was injured in last week's Tampa Bay Buccaneers game. So we'll have to pay attention to what the practice report is as the week unfolds to sort of see what those guys' status is. But when it came to Ruke, probably the most pessimistic it sounded like from Raheem, where he basically said it's to be determined. It's not looking particularly good with Troy Andersen and Justin Simmons. They seem to be progressing fine. They will be practicing probably on a limited basis to start the week. We'll see if they can progress to full participation in practice by the end of the week, which will certainly put them on track for playing on Sunday against the Dallas Cowboys. But we'll just sort of have to see. So, with Ruke, I think the positive is that, if it was a season-ending injury, he probably would have gone on IR yesterday on Tuesday, as opposed to it still being TBD, I guess you could say. But it did sound like Raheem is talking about it. Again, trying to read between the lines, and it's difficult to do that. But, looking at the injury live on Sunday, or, after watching the film, really, it seemed like it was a major injury. And so my expectation is Ruke is going to miss multiple games, but we'll see how that goes. But Raheem didn't necessarily say anything that would indicate that, but at the same time, didn't say anything that would throw cold water on that. But for now, let's assume that all three of those guys, Ruke Orhorhoro, Troy Andersen, and Justin Simmons, do miss time. What does that mean for the Falcons this Sunday against the Dallas Cowboys? And if Ruke misses time, that increases the odds that we will finally get to see Brandon Dorlus, his fellow rookie, the Falcons' 4th-round pick, active for the first time this season. Although I guess there is a chance that the Falcons could decide that if Ruke does miss this game, that Kentavius Street could return to the active lineup. He's been inactive, Street that is, for the last 4 weeks. Doras has been, of course, inactive for all 8 weeks this season. Many people have been clamoring for him to get opportunities, just like for the first 4 games of the season when Kentavius Street was active. People were clamoring for Ruke to get those opportunities, and then Street ultimately got benched in favor of Ruke Orhorhoro, and Ruke's done a good job in his stead since then. So we'll see if that's the case for Dorlus with Ruke going down. Jimmy Lake did speak to the media last week talking about when he was asked about Brandon Dorlus, and he seemed to indicate that Dorlus is on track to play at some point this season, but obviously time will tell. And, I think Lake specifically mentioned sort of the potential and the probability of there being injuries that would probably force him into the lineup. And this is one of those situations. So I do expect us to see Dorlus this week, assuming Ruke is down this week. So we'll see on that front. But we've seen Troy Andersen also miss the last 4 games due to that knee injury that he suffered in his Saints game. And if he does miss this game, it means that the Falcons are going to be without their best coverage linebacker for the 5th week in a row. And that is going to mean that what we've seen over those last 4 weeks, where you've gotten a healthy mix of J.D. Bertrand getting some reps, but it's been primarily Caden Ellis and Nate Landman in the lineup. And so we'll see if that's the case. But, I did think Bertrand did some good stuff in limited action last week against Tampa Bay. So, hopefully he'll see some increased workload, and we'll continue to get these rookies involved in the back half of this season so that we can properly evaluate those guys. With Justin Simmons, if he misses time, you'll see Richie Grant replace him probably as a starter like we saw last week. The Falcons made the interesting choice of only having 2 active safeties for the Bucs game with, presumably Kevin King and I don't know who's the 4th, Natron Brooks, Antonio Hamilton. I don't know who their 4th safety is. They do have Dane Cruikshank on the practice squad, so we'll see on that front. But, Richie did not play particularly well in Justin Simmons' absence. I don't think his play was as poor as the PFF grades suggested, but certainly not his best game. And so hopefully if he does start again this week, which hopefully, and of these 3 guys, I'm probably most optimistic that Simmons will return to the lineup this week, but we'll see. And again, a lot of that is just based off of what Raheem was saying and the expectation that his injury was not as serious as the other 2 guys are. But, hopefully Richie will bounce back this week, but we'll see on that front. But, I think the good thing for the Falcons with these injuries is you're not as worried about missing some of these guys against this Dallas team, just because Dallas doesn't have the same sort of dynamic speed of other teams that the Falcons are going to face in future weeks. But it's not as if, Jake Ferguson, the Cowboys tight end, Rico Dowdle, the Cowboys top running back or bums or anything like that. So, every little bit would help. So if the Falcons can get at least 2 of these guys back or 1 of these guys back this week, that would be great for the Falcons defense. So we'll see as the practice week unfolds. And obviously our next episode will be a crossover Thursday here on Locked On Falcons. So continue to make us your first listen, guys, by checking us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL if you want to get the scoop on all the other NFL teams. And of course, if you want to get specific scoops on the Cowboys, Landon McCool and Marcus Mosher have you guys covered on Locked On Cowboys. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every